Brace for impact. All hands, secure your stations. Captain Darius Van's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and steady, commanding the crew's attention over the ship's battered intercom. Outside, the Solace trembled violently, its hull groaning under the strain of repeated impacts. The stars outside the viewports were swallowed by swirling tendrils of violet and black. The Nebula, once thought to be a safe passage, now felt like a living, breathing creature, suffocating them in its deadly embrace. The ship lurched again, a massive shudder running through its frame, rattling the walls as if the Nebula itself was tightening its grip. Inside, the emergency lights flickered, bathing the corridors in a strobe-like dance. The air was thick with the scent of burning insulation, tinged with the faint metallic tang of leaking coolant. Captain Van's boots slammed against the floor as he strode down the narrow corridor, his eyes scanning the heads-up display on his wrist, which blinked erratically as the system struggled to process the ship's failing data. "Bridge, report! What's our status?" Van demanded, voice unyielding, though his hands tightened around the display, knuckles whitening with the effort of holding on to control. "Captain, radiation levels are rising. We can't hold much longer." The voice of Lieutenant Morrow Lethan crackled through the communicator, broken by the distortion in the air, but still carrying the weight of fear. "The alien ships are locking onto us. Shut it down! All shields to full power. We need time to breathe," Van barked. His eyes snapped to the open viewports, where the Nebula's swirling mass grew ever closer, threatening to swallow them whole. His mind raced. No time at all. The ship was a hospital, not a warship. They were unprepared for this kind of assault. Van gritted his teeth and turned on his heel, heading straight for the command center. The ship's corridors were alive with the frantic scramble of crew members, their voices overlapping in tense bursts, their movements sharp and efficient, survival instinct taking over in the face of mounting doom. A faint murmur of quick, urgent orders filtered through his earpiece as Lieutenant Akinos Velar, the tactical officer, barked orders at the crew. The entire ship seemed to pulse with the erratic heartbeat of a dying machine. Every door that slid open revealed another frantic crew member or another failing system. Some had already resorted to jury-rigging the ship's ancient tech, desperately bringing online systems that had been dormant for centuries. The forgotten technology of Earth's past was both their salvation and their curse. As Van reached the command center, he paused at the door. His fingers hovered just above the release control, the metal cool against his skin. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and the first thing that hit him was the sound, no, the feeling, of tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. The officers were already at their posts, but their faces were drawn with exhaustion, eyes wide, reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "Captain, we've lost comms with the fleet. Whatever's out there, it's blocking us." Valar's voice was tight, as though he were holding something back. "And we've got incoming." His finger pointed to the readout, where alien ships blinked ominously, each ship marked by a red dot, a glaring, unforgiving beacon in the dark. Van's eyes narrowed. Hostiles. The word was a sharp slap to his senses. He turned his gaze to the swirling nebula on the screen, the chaos within it making the view almost unreadable. The gas clouds twisted, illuminated by sudden bursts of distant stars, like dangerous whirlpools in the fabric of space. He could almost feel its crushing weight, pressing down on them. "Bring up the laser plasma displays. I want to see them, all of them," Van commanded. The tactical display flickered to life in front of him, revealing the alien fleet, no larger than a dozen ships, but their design was sleek, deadly, alien in a way that set his pulse racing. The ships shifted, their forms elusive in the radiation storm, moving like predators circling their prey. "Captain, we need to get out of here. The radiation levels are spiking, and our systems are failing faster than we can repair them. We won't last much longer." Valar's voice was strained, almost pleading. He was right. They were running out of options. Van set his jaw. The threat from the aliens was real, but so was the battle to keep his crew alive. He could almost hear the heartbeat of the ship, pulsing like a warning drum in his chest. The Solace was more than just a ship. It was humanity's lifeline in the stars. If they didn't survive, if they didn't get through this, What would that say about Earth's place in the galaxy? He slammed his fist down on the console, making the room flinch. We don't have time to waste on what-ifs, Vaylor. We fight, we survive, or we die. That is the plan. Get the AI online, reroute power from the medical deck if you have to. Just make sure we have firepower. Vaylor gave a curt nod, his eyes hardening with resolve. The crew moved with renewed urgency, activating forgotten systems, rerouting energy through the ship. A surge of power rippled through the walls as ancient technology hummed to life. But just as the shields came online, the Solace was struck again, a massive jolt that sent Van stumbling. The screen flashed, warnings lighting up every corner of the display. The alien ships were attacking, their firepower intense, but not aimed at total destruction, yet. They were testing their prey, probing for weakness, playing with them like a predator with its meal. "We're not going down like this," Van muttered, his voice barely audible, but steady with intent. The words didn't need to be spoken aloud, but they felt right. He glanced around at his crew, the men who had put their lives in his hands. There were no illusions anymore. They were trapped. The Solace was just a piece on the galactic board, but they would not break, not on his watch. "Prepare for counterattack. All hands on deck," Van's voice rang out across the bridge. "We're not just fighting for this ship. We're fighting for Earth." As the ship steadied and the crew worked tirelessly to maintain control, a new sense of focus gripped them all. There was no time to mourn, no time for hesitation. The battle for the Solace was far from over, but for Captain Darius Van, there was no time to savor the small victory. The enemy's fire had ceased for the moment, but the ship groaned, its systems protesting against the strain of constant assault. Van's gaze darted to the heads-up display, where the flashing red icons indicating damage kept blinking. Each one felt like a countdown to inevitable failure, a reminder that their time was running out. "Captain, we've got a problem," came the strained voice of Dr. Varric Kaleson, the ship's lead medical officer, his breath ragged over the comm. "The virus. It's spreading faster than we anticipated. At this rate, the entire crew could be infected within hours." Van felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just another technical issue to manage. It was a threat that could wipe them out faster than the aliens ever could. The ship's corridors had grown eerily quiet, save for the shuffle of boots and the occasional clatter of metal. The medical bay was a war zone in itself, with doctors and nurses moving with frantic urgency, while Varric paced anxiously by the entrance, visibly overwhelmed. "Give me details, Kaleson," Van said, forcing his voice to remain level, even though his insides were churning. "What are we dealing with?" Varric's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "It's a pathogen unlike anything we've seen before, highly contagious, airborne, but it's also affecting the neurological system. Hallucinations, seizures. Some of the crew are already showing symptoms. I don't know how much longer we can contain it, Captain." The weight of the situation pressed down on Van like a vice, and for a brief moment, he closed his eyes. The Solace had always been more than just a hospital ship. It had been Earth's lifeline in the stars, carrying with it the promise of healing and hope. Now it was a death trap, and the very technology meant to save lives was starting to work against them. But Van had no time to mourn. He had to make choices, hard ones. "What about containment?" Van asked, his voice cold despite the heat building in his chest. He had to be the leader now, not the man who feared failure. Not yet. "We've sealed off the affected areas, but the ventilation system is compromised. It's spreading through the air ducts." Varric paused, as though considering the weight of his next words. "I'm not sure how much time we have, Captain." Van inhaled sharply. "Then we're going to have to move faster. No more delays." With the comms muted, Van turned toward Lieutenant Akanos Vaylor, his tactical officer. The man had a sharp mind, and Van knew that if anyone could pull them out of this, it was Vaylor. "We can't keep running from one threat to the next," Van said, his voice low but resolute. "We need to think long-term. What's our next move?" Vaylor met his gaze with unwavering confidence, though his usual sharpness was now tinged with concern. "The alien ships may have pulled back for now, but they're still out there, Captain. The nebula's making it impossible to track them, but they'll be back. They know we're crippled." His voice softened just a touch. "But with the crew falling apart, we need to choose. Do we focus on the virus, or do we fortify our position?" Van's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting priorities. The Solace had always been a symbol of hope for humanity, its mission to bring peace and healing to the farthest reaches of space. But right now, hope was a commodity they couldn't afford. Survival had become the priority, and the enemies, alien and viral, had to be fought simultaneously. But how? "Contain the virus. We can't afford to lose more of the crew. Get those emergency stasis pods online. I want everyone who's symptomatic in isolation now." Van's gaze hardened. "We can't risk any more casualties." Valar nodded sharply, and with one swift motion, he turned to relay the orders, his voice already taking command of the room. The tension in the air seemed to rise with every passing second, thick like a storm cloud about to break. The crew was in no state to fight a war on two fronts, but that's exactly what they had to do. Van clenched his fists, muscles taut with the weight of it all. They couldn't afford mistakes. Van looked back at the plasma display in front of him, scanning the flickering data. The alien ships had moved deeper into the nebula, seemingly waiting for the right moment to strike. But that wasn't their only worry. The virus was a constant threat, creeping through the vents, infecting the crew like a silent predator. Van's mind raced. If the crew couldn't stay healthy, if they couldn't keep their wits about them, how could they survive this? The Solace lurched again, the familiar creak of the hull groaning as another impact rattled the ship. The lights flickered for a moment, casting an eerie glow over the bridge. A deep rumble filled the air, like the nebula itself was growling. Van gritted his teeth, his thoughts a blur of strategy and survival. "Captain," came the calm voice of Maro Lethan, his report cutting through Van's spiraling thoughts. "The enemy ships have re-engaged their weapons systems. They're closing in again." Van stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath. The stench of burning circuitry and the sharp tang of fear hung heavy in the air. But Van refused to be swayed. The Solace was a beacon of human tenacity, of humanity's ability to survive against all odds. He tapped the comm. "Everyone, prepare for battle. I want all defensive systems on high alert. This is it. We either get out of here, or we fight to the last man." There was a long, silent pause before Valar's voice came through the comm again, steady and resolute. "Understood, Captain." As the crew scrambled into action, Van allowed himself one brief moment to look out at the stars beyond. The nebula, now glowing with ominous swirls of light, seemed to mock them. The ship was surrounded, caught between two enemies, an alien force and an invisible virus that no one understood. But that wasn't the end of the story. Van's resolve tightened. "We will survive," he muttered to himself, as much a command as a promise. The Solace was far from done. Neither was he. The Solace groaned again, this time with a more ominous, metallic rattle that vibrated through the floor underfoot. Captain Van stood at the front of the bridge, his hands pressed firmly against the console as the stars outside twisted and warped. His mind raced, grappling with a strange and growing sense of uncertainty. The alien ships were nearby, their movements unpredictable in the swirling chaos of the nebula, and yet the pressing issue at hand wasn't just the threat they posed. It was the virus, rapidly claiming more of the crew with every passing minute. His pulse quickened, but he refused to let the tension cloud his judgment. Van turned slowly to face his tactical officer, Lieutenant Akanos Valar, whose face remained tense despite the cool, professional tone of his voice. "Captain, we've got one more option," Valar said, his words cutting through the air with a sharp edge. "But I don't know if it'll work. If we can't outfight them, we need to outsmart them. I say we try negotiating." Van froze. The idea of attempting diplomacy with an enemy that had launched a surprise attack felt absurd, yet part of him understood the necessity. "We don't have a choice," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But the enemy doesn't want peace. If they did, they'd already be talking to us. What makes you think they'll respond to a truce?" "They've never encountered humanity before, Captain. They don't know us." Valar's voice was calm, though his eyes betrayed a hint of doubt. This could be a test. We might just have to play a game of our own. Offer them something they can't refuse. Van's jaw clenched as he processed the implications. Offer them something they can't refuse. In a situation like this, it felt like an impossible gambit. The Solace was not a warship. It was a hospital, designed for healing, not fighting. They were outmatched, outgunned, and every inch of their ship screamed fragility. And yet the glint of a new, unsettling thought flickered in his mind. What if their only hope lay not in brute force, but in diplomacy? It was a dangerous thought, but one worth entertaining. "Prepare the communication protocols," Van ordered. "Let's see if they're listening." Valar nodded, though the uneasy tension still radiated off of him. "Understood, but be ready. They may not respond well to this kind of move." Van stood at the front of the bridge, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on him. The steady hum of the emergency lighting flickered in the background, casting eerie shadows over the crew as they worked. Their faces, etched with exhaustion and worry, looked to him for guidance, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. A harsh beep from the heads-up display interrupted his thoughts. Valar's fingers flew over the control panel and a screen flared to life, displaying the coordinates of the alien ships. The flickering plasma display shifted as new data scrolled rapidly across the screen. "There they are," Valar muttered, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. "They're holding their position, waiting for us to make a move." Van felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. Their window of opportunity was closing, and quickly. His eyes flicked to the radar readout, where red blips signaled the advancing alien fleet, their movements eerily synchronized. It was clear. They were waiting for something. Van's pulse quickened. Whatever this was, it was more than just a show of force. It was calculated. "Do we have anything to go on?" Van asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "There's one thing," Valar replied, his finger hovering over a flashing icon on the display. "One of their ships is emitting a constant signal, but it's encrypted. We could attempt a direct link, but I'm not sure what we'll find on the other end." Van stared at the screen for a long moment, weighing the decision. A direct link? That was an invitation to risk everything. But there was no time left to hesitate. They needed information. They needed to find out if the aliens were here to conquer or simply to test them. "Do it," he ordered, his voice hard. The screen shifted again, now displaying an encrypted communication interface. Valar worked quickly, hacking into the signal, his fingers dancing over the controls. The seconds dragged by, thick with uncertainty. Van stood frozen, his eyes locked on the flickering plasma screen, watching as lines of code blurred into incomprehensible data. Finally, a voice crackled through the comms, distorted at first, then clearer. "Human vessel, this is Commander Galen Drivor. We seek no conflict." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Commander? The aliens had a commander. Van's throat went dry. He hadn't expected that. "We are here to offer a proposition, not war." Driver's voice continued, cutting through the static. There was a coldness to the words, but it was tinged with something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "Humanity is not yet ready to engage with us, but we are willing to hear your terms." A ripple of disbelief ran through the room. Van's eyes darted to Valar, who was staring at the display in stunned silence. This was not what he had expected. Not by a long shot. Van cleared his throat. His mind raced, but his voice remained steady as he responded. "You attacked us, killed my men, and now you expect us to negotiate." His words were calm, but the heat of anger simmered just beneath the surface. "What exactly do you want from us?" There was a pause on the other end, as if Driver was weighing his response carefully. "Your planet holds something of interest to us," Driver finally said, his voice smooth, calculated. "Something you have forgotten, something you once held in your possession. We wish to acquire it peacefully." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with implication. Something they once held? Van's heart pounded as the room seemed to spin. What could they possibly mean? Earth had never been anything special. No advanced alien weaponry, no unimaginable secrets hidden away. Or had there been? Van's thoughts raced. He had to tread carefully. And if we don't give it to you? Van pressed, his voice firm. What happens then? Then we will take it from you by force. Drever's words were calm, almost detached, but Van felt the weight behind them. Van's grip tightened on the console. The room felt smaller now, as if the air itself was closing in on him. His thoughts swirled, racing toward the unknown. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about something larger, something buried deep within Earth's history. We will leave you to consider, Drever's voice echoed again. This is your only warning. The comms went silent. The room fell into a stunned, suffocating quiet. Captain, Valar said, his voice low. What do we do now? Van's eyes remained fixed on the empty screen, his mind whirling. We fight, but now we fight smarter. We need to find out exactly what they're after. But the question that lingered in the air, unanswered, was the one that haunted him most. What had humanity forgotten? The comms fell silent, and the bridge of the Solace felt like a tomb. Captain Van's thoughts churned as the words from the alien commander echoed in his head. What did they want from Earth? What had humanity forgotten, buried beneath centuries of peace and complacency? The air on the bridge grew thick with anticipation, the oppressive quiet broken only by the occasional sharp beep from the plasma display or the soft scuffle of boots on the floor. Van's eyes flickered over the plasma display, watching the red blips representing the alien ships, now still and waiting in the nebula's depths. They hadn't moved, yet. Time was a luxury they didn't have. He could feel the weight of his crew's eyes on him, each one filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and impatience. They were all waiting for him to make the next move. But how could he make one when he didn't even know what the enemy truly wanted? His hand tightened on the control panel, knuckles white against the smooth surface. Prepare to take us deeper into the nebula. If they're waiting for us to make a mistake, then let's give them something they didn't expect. Valar, standing by the comm station, gave a curt nod. Aye, Captain, but you're aware this could push us closer to their ships. We may not get a second chance. We're out of chances, Van replied flatly, his voice hard. He didn't need to see the skepticism in Valar's eyes to know it was there. The same skepticism that had been building ever since the first alien shots had torn into their hull. And we're out of options. If they're waiting to see what we'll do, let's give them something to think about. The quiet buzz of the emergency lighting seemed to pulse with the growing tension. The Solace drifted slowly forward, its battered hull creaking under the strain of the delicate course adjustments. The crew worked in tandem, their movements tense and efficient. Every moment felt like a countdown, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. Van stood at the front of the bridge, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Suddenly the ship lurched violently, throwing the crew off balance. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the walls, and the lights flickered. Valar's voice rang out sharply, cutting through the disarray. Captain, shields are failing. Something's hit us. Van's eyes snapped to the display. A new red blip blinked on the radar, flashing closer than before. The alien ships were moving. They'd given chase. Full power to the shields, Van ordered, his voice a calm contrast to the chaos surrounding him. Get us out of here now! The ship responded sluggishly, its systems struggling to keep up with the demand. Van could feel the tremor of uncertainty in the crew. Every second stretched longer than the last, and he knew they were racing against time. The Solace was limping, vulnerable, an easy target in the vast, shifting nebula. Captain, came the strained voice of Doctor Varric Kaleson over the comm. I've got more casualties in the medical bay. We've sealed off the infected, but it's spreading faster than we can contain it. Some of the crew are already in critical condition. Van clenched his jaw. He couldn't afford to think about the medical crisis now. He couldn't let the virus take precedence over their survival. If they didn't find a way out, if they didn't figure out what the aliens wanted, none of this would matter. Hold on, Doctor, Van said, his voice clipped. We're going to need all hands on deck in the next few minutes. Do what you can, but we need everyone focused on staying alive right now. He turned back to Valar, who had been working furiously at the console. The alien ships were closing in, their weapons powering up, and the Solace was in their sights. What's our status? Van demanded. They're locking onto us, Vaylor replied, his voice tight with urgency. We can't outrun them, not in this nebula, but we can try something. Risky. If we can navigate through the radiation storm, we might be able to shake them off. It's a long shot, but it's the best we've got. Van's mind raced. A long shot. Was there any other option? We take it, he said, his voice resolute. Do it. Velar punched a few keys, and the Solace shuddered again, as if protesting against the strain. The ship's engines roared to life, sluggish at first but gradually gaining power as they edged deeper into the nebula. A violent flash lit up the view screen as a nearby radiation storm erupted, sending a shockwave of energy through the ship. The shields flared brightly, straining to absorb the blast. Van gritted his teeth and fought to stay steady. The ship was shaking violently now, and the crew clung to their stations, doing their best to keep the ship on course. "Brace for impact!" Valar shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of the storm's roar. "They're right behind us!" Another explosion rocked the Solace, and the ship lurched, sending the crew scrambling for balance. Van's fingers tightened on the console, his heart pounding in his chest. They were running out of time. They had to find a way to survive, to outwit the aliens who were closing in with deadly intent. Suddenly, a sharp, echoing beep pierced the noise, and the plasma display flared to life with a new message. The alien ships had broken their pursuit, retreating into the deeper, darker folds of the nebula. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Van stared at the screen, disbelief rising within him. Why had they stopped? Had the aliens really given up the chase? "Captain," Valar said cautiously, his voice strained, "I think we've lost them. For now." Van didn't move. He couldn't. He stared at the plasma display, watching as the red blips representing the alien ships faded into the swirling clouds of the nebula, leaving them in relative quiet. The crew slowly began to relax, the tension momentarily easing from their shoulders. But Van's gut told him this was far from over. Something wasn't right. The aliens didn't just give up like that. They were too intelligent, too calculated. The question lingered in his mind like an insistent whisper. What were they after? "Contact driver again," Van ordered, his voice low. "I want answers." He turned away from the screen and looked at the faces around him, each one tense, waiting for his next command. "This isn't over," Van muttered, almost to himself. Not by a long shot. The alien ships might have backed off for now, but Van knew this was just the calm before the storm. What had the commander meant by something humanity had forgotten? And how long would it be before they came back? The questions gnawed at him, but one thing was certain. The Solace wasn't just a hospital ship anymore. It had become humanity's last line of defense in a galaxy far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The Solace drifted further into the dense nebula, its battered frame groaning as the crew worked feverishly to keep the ship intact. The alien ships had pulled back for now, but Van knew better than to think the danger had passed. The sudden quiet in the air, broken only by the occasional beep of the display or the shuffle of boots, felt like a temporary lull in a storm. The plasma displays glowed with flickering data, but the information only raised more questions than answers. Van stood at the command station, his eyes locked on the shifting chaos outside. The nebula had swallowed them whole, its gases twisting in the darkness, a maze of violent currents and deadly radiation. The Solace had no place being here, and it was becoming painfully obvious that they were ill-prepared for what lay ahead. "Captain," Vaylor's voice broke through the stillness, his words thick with unease. "I'm picking up something. On the far side of the nebula. It's not an alien ship. At least, not like the others. It's—" He hesitated, scanning the readings with growing suspicion. "It's an energy signature. Ancient, Captain. It's too strong to be just a wreckage." Van's heart skipped a beat. His fingers tightened around the edge of the console as he turned to face Valar. "Ancient?" "Yeah," Valar replied, his voice low. "It's not anything from the last century. Hell, not even from the last millennium. I can't explain it, but it's there." The room fell into an uneasy silence as Van processed the information. An ancient energy source? Something buried in the depths of the nebula, possibly of Earth's origin, had been hidden all this time. Could it be the weapon the aliens were after? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about the Solace's true purpose, or Earth's role in the larger galactic picture. "Bring it up," Van said, his voice taut with a mix of curiosity and dread. "I want to see it for myself." The laser plasma display flared to life, casting an eerie glow over the bridge. A map of the nebula materialized before them, tracking the mysterious signal deep within its heart. The readings pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, but growing more pronounced with each passing moment. Whatever it wasn't just a random anomaly. It was real, and it was waiting for them. "We're going in," Van declared, his voice firm. "If this is what they're after, we'll make sure they don't get it. We're not running anymore." Valar's eyes flicked to the display, the lines of his face hardening. "But Captain, we don't know what we're walking into. This could be a trap or worse. Something we can't fight." Van's jaw clenched. The thought had crossed his mind too, but there was no turning back. They had no choice but to find out what lay within the nebula. "We don't get to choose, Valar. We fight. We always fight." Without another word, Valar set the course, and the Solace moved deeper into the nebula, the dim glow of the energy signature drawing closer. Every crew member on the bridge was on edge, aware that this could be their only shot at survival. The ship creaked again, groaning with the effort of holding together under the stress. Radiation levels were climbing steadily, but the ship's systems were holding, barely. As they neared the coordinates, the tension was palpable. Van could almost taste the unease in the air, thick and metallic, mingling with the smell of overheated circuits. The Solace was on the edge, and the crew could feel it. "Captain," Valar said quietly, his voice strained, "I don't like this. The energy's fluctuating. It's like the whole nebula is reacting to our presence. Something's wrong." Van's mind raced. He could feel it too, a growing pressure, like the very fabric of space around them was shifting. The ship was on the brink of something, and whatever it was, they were about to face it head on. The display flickered, the readings suddenly spiking. A warning blared across the bridge, but it was too late. Before anyone could react, a blast of energy surged from the depths of the nebula, slamming into the Solace. The ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and for a split second, the world was plunged into darkness. "Report!" Van's voice cut through the confusion as he struggled to maintain his footing. He grabbed the edge of a console for support. "We've lost power to the forward shields." Valar's voice was frantic, but he was already working to stabilize the ship's systems. "Damage to the engine nacelles. We're drifting." The Solace was caught in the gravitational pull of whatever had just struck them, and the crew scrambled to regain control. Van's heart pounded in his chest. The energy signature had come to life, but at what cost? "Keep us in one piece," Van barked, his eyes glued to the plasma displays as Valar worked to restore power. "Captain," Valar's voice trembled slightly, "there's something else. The signal. It's coming from inside the Solace." Van froze, his mind racing. "Inside? What are you talking about?" "I'm not sure," Valar said, his hands flying over the controls. "But the energy readings are coming from within the ship itself. It's like we've been walking right into a trap. The source, it's in our systems." A cold shiver ran down Van's spine. The Solace, had it been designed to carry something? An ancient weapon? A forgotten relic of humanity's past? The pieces began to click together, but the full picture remained out of reach, just beyond their grasp. The ship lurched again, this time more violently. The entire bridge shook, and Van's stomach lurched with the force of it. He staggered back, gripping the edge of his chair, as the walls of the bridge warped and twisted with the force of another shockwave. "Report! What the hell is happening?" Van demanded, his voice rising with urgency. "We're losing control of the systems," Valar shouted, his voice strained. "Whatever's in the ship, it's reacting to the nebula. The Solace is being pulled into the center. We can't stop it." Van's mind spun, trying to process the unfolding chaos. They were no longer in control of the ship, of the situation, of anything. The Solace was being drawn towards something buried deep within the nebula, something they hadn't understood until it was too late. "Prepare for impact," Valar shouted, his voice barely heard over the shrieking alarms. Van's gaze fixed on the screens as the energy signature grew more intense, more tangible. The Solace was headed straight for the heart of it, and they had no idea what waited for them there. The feeling of inevitability hung in the air like a storm cloud. They were about to find out just how deep the mystery of the nebula went, and what horrors lay hidden inside the Solace itself. The Solace trembled violently as it was yanked deeper into the heart of the nebula. Van gripped the control panel, his knuckles white, while the plasma display flickered with erratic data. It felt as if the very fabric of space around them was bending, pulling, distorting their reality. The ship groaned under the strain, its systems crackling with instability. But there was no time to recalibrate. They had crossed a threshold, and the Solace was now careening towards whatever lay at the center of the storm. "Hold steady," Van barked, his voice cutting through the panic that threatened to take over. The crew was scrambling, their faces drawn with exhaustion, sweat glistening on their foreheads. It wasn't just the ship that was broken. It was everything. The Solace wasn't just a vessel. It was humanity's last hope, and right now it felt like it was slipping through their fingers. "Captain, the energy readings are off the charts." Valar's voice was tight, his eyes glued to the heads-up display as the data streamed in, a torrent of numbers and symbols. "We're being pulled into something, but I don't know what. The energy's concentrated in the center of the nebula. It's—" The ship lurched again, the force of it rattling the walls. The emergency lights blinked frantically as a sharp whining noise pierced the air. Van's heart slammed against his ribcage, and he knew they weren't just falling into a trap. They were about to cross into something much worse. "What's happening?" Van demanded, his voice rough with urgency. "We've lost power to the aft thrusters," Valar replied quickly, his face grim. "Whatever's pulling us in, it's like gravity itself is shifting. We can't fight it. We're stuck." The room went silent for a moment, save for the hissing of damaged systems struggling to stay online. The walls groaned again, and the air tasted bitter, thick with the stench of burning electronics. The sense of helplessness was suffocating, yet Van refused to allow it to take hold. "Get us out of here," Van snapped, trying to hold on to the last shred of control. "Find a way." But the answers weren't coming. The ship's navigational system flashed on the display, an emergency override, but it was clear the Solace was no longer theirs to command. There was something ahead, something so massive and incomprehensible that it defied all logic. The nebula had concealed it, hidden it until now, until they had stumbled right into its grasp. Valar's hands were flying over the plasma controls, but there was a growing tremor in his movements. "Captain, I can't. Whatever is in front of us, it's alive. The readings, they're—" Before Valar could finish, a jagged flash of light erupted from the screen. A ripple in the nebula, bright and fierce, erupted like a volcanic burst of energy. The ship's hull shuddered with a deafening crash as it was hit again, this time from a direction they hadn't expected. Alien fire. The same ships they had assumed had pulled back were now emerging from the folds of the nebula, their forms slipping between the gas clouds like phantoms. "Contact! We're under fire!" Valar shouted, panic creeping into his voice. The alien weapons raked across the ship's side, and the Solace rocked violently again. Sparks shot out from the overhead panels, and the smell of scorched wires burned in the air. The lights flickered once more, casting the room in a harsh, flashing red glow. Van's mind snapped into focus. This was it. This wasn't a battle they could win with force alone, not anymore. "Damn it!" Van slammed his fist into the panel. "We need to fight back. We can't just sit here." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy and ominous. And then Valar's voice came, low but fierce. "I've got an idea." Van turned, eyes narrowing. "What?" Valar's fingers danced over the plasma controls, pulling up data that made no sense. The energy reading from the center of the nebula had intensified again, but this time there was something else. A dormant signal, encrypted in a way the systems had never processed before. "It's inside the Solace," Valar said, voice tight with realization. The weapon, Captain. It's already here. Van's stomach dropped. The weapon. The one the aliens had been searching for. It wasn't something buried in the depths of the nebula. It was in the ship. In the ship that they had all assumed was simply a medical vessel. But this wasn't just a hospital ship. It was an arsenal of forgotten power, left dormant for centuries. The truth slammed into Van like a physical blow. The Solace wasn't just a victim. It had been the prize all along, the very thing the aliens were hunting. And now they were cornered, and the ship was reacting in ways no one could control. "Can you activate it?" Van asked, his voice cold. "I can try," Vaylor replied, his eyes flicking nervously to the plasma display. "But it's ancient. If it reacts the way I think it will—" "I said try," Van cut in, his voice a low growl. "We don't have time for hesitation." Vaylor nodded and set to work, his hands flying across the display, navigating through layers of encrypted data. The alien ships continued their barrage, the Solace's shields flickering dangerously. The crew's faces were etched with the harsh light of desperation as they braced for impact. A bead of sweat traced down Van's neck as he watched the readout, waiting for the signal to come through. "Captain," Vaylor said, his voice strained, "I think it's working. The system's unlocking. But I can't control the energy flow. It's too much." The ship groaned again, a deep, resonant shudder that rattled every pane of glass and panel. The lights flickered once more, casting strange shadows across the bridge. "Now!" Van commanded, his voice sharp. In an instant the ship's systems flared with a sudden, violent surge. The Solace lurched, as if alive, and a low, rumbling sound vibrated through the floor beneath them. From deep within the ship, something ancient and dormant awakened. A blast of energy surged out from the core, slamming into the incoming alien ships with the force of a tidal wave. The bridge was filled with a blinding light as the plasma displays cracked and sputtered under the sudden overload. The alien ships, momentarily overwhelmed, veered off course, their weapons scattering, unable to regain control. The Solace had fired back. This wasn't a mere shot. This was the ship itself, the forgotten weapon of a lost time, fighting for its life. The alien fleet had been stunned, pushed back into the nebula's depth for the moment. The Solace, battered but not beaten, had just delivered its first blow. But Van knew this was only the beginning. They had no idea how much of the Solace had just awakened, nor the true cost of what they'd unleashed. He turned toward Vaylor, his voice steady but filled with the weight of everything that had just transpired. "Get us out of here. Now." And as the Solace limped away, Van could only wonder, what had they really unleashed? What was the true purpose of the ship they had all once trusted? And more importantly, what would the aliens do when they returned? The Solace lurched again, though this time it wasn't from the violent tremors of alien fire. The ship's systems hummed with an eerie quiet, broken only by the sporadic beeps from the consoles, each one a reminder of how fragile their hold on survival had become. The bridge was dark, except for the dim light cast from the laser plasma displays, now flickering as the power struggles to stabilize. The air smelled metallic, like heated circuits, but underneath it was something heavier, an unspoken sense of doom, a tangible weight in the crew's shoulders. They had fought back. They had survived the attack. But at what cost? Van stood at the command center, his gaze fixed on the flickering screens, processing the aftermath. The alien fleet had retreated into the depths of the nebula, no longer an immediate threat, but Van couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. The unknown energy source they had just unleashed, the ship's forgotten weapon, was still out there, still a force of unimaginable power. "Captain, we've got a problem," Vaylor said from the tactical station, his voice heavy with unease. Van turned to him, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Vaylor's hands hovered over the controls, uncertainty in his eyes. "We've only scratched the surface of what that energy signature means. The weapon, the thing inside the Solace, it's more than just a defense mechanism. It's tied into the ship's very core. If we try to use it again, it could destabilize the entire ship." Van's stomach dropped at the weight of the words. He didn't need to be told what that meant. If the weapon malfunctioned, it wasn't just the Solace they would lose. It was everything. "We can't risk it," Van muttered, the truth settling into his chest like a lead weight. "But we also can't just sit here. We need to prepare for what comes next. The aliens will come back, and when they do, they'll be ready. We need to be ready." "Captain," Valar interrupted, his voice laced with urgency, "I'm not sure we can keep the ship intact long enough to make any more plans. The damage is extensive. We need to find a way to repair the Solace, and fast." Van turned away from him, his eyes drifting to the screens where the coordinates of the alien fleet still flickered. The readings showed them retreating deeper into the nebula, but Van knew it was only temporary. They would come back. They always did. "Then we fix the Solace," Van said, his voice firm. "We fix it, and we find a way to turn this situation around. First thing we do, stabilize the ship. I want every available crew member working on repairs. We can't fight a battle if we're falling apart." Valar nodded, already typing in commands, but his hands lingered on the keys. "We'll need to reroute power from the medical decks, Captain. We can't keep both systems operational at the same time, not with the damage we've taken." "Do it," Van ordered, his voice sharp. "I'll handle the rest." The next several hours were a blur of frantic activity. The Solace creaked and groaned as it drifted deeper into the nebula, but the crew moved with purpose, working together in the tense silence that followed their battle. Every plasma display glowed with urgency, showing flashing red icons, warning signals, and messages about structural integrity. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, the crew kept moving. The ship was their home, their last bastion, and they would not let it fall apart without a fight. Van paced the bridge, his mind sharp, even as his body ached from the strain. His thoughts were tangled with the mystery of the energy signature, the weapon that had been buried deep within the ship, and the implications of its power. If the aliens had known about it, if they had been waiting for it, they weren't simply attacking for resources. They were after something much more valuable, something humanity itself might have forgotten. The question gnawed at him. What did they want? What had been hidden from them for so long? "Captain?" Valar's voice broke through Van's thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He turned to find Valar at the control panel, his fingers poised over the console. "We've got something. The alien fleet. It's not retreating. They're regrouping. They're moving to intercept us." Van's pulse quickened. He'd known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality all the more immediate. He approached the station, his eyes scanning the display as Valar highlighted the coordinates. The alien fleet wasn't just lingering in the nebula, it was coming for them, coming for the Solace. "How long do we have?" Van asked, his voice low. "Less than an hour," Valar replied, his voice steady, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. Van took a deep breath, trying to process the enormity of the situation. The Solace wasn't ready. The weapon they had unlocked wasn't something they could control, not without risking everything. They didn't have time to figure it out. They had to act fast. "Plan?" Valar asked, his eyes meeting Van's. Van's mind raced. There was no way they could outrun the enemy. The Solace was too damaged, and the nebula was too thick. But they could fight. They could turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. The weapon in the ship's core, if they could control it, if they could channel it properly, they might just have a chance. "We prepare for the worst," Van said, his voice firm. "We draw them in. We use the nebula to our advantage. We get them close, and then we unleash everything we've got. All systems go. Every weapon, every tool we have. Use it. I want the entire crew on high alert." "Understood, Captain," Valar replied, his voice resolute as he began transmitting the orders. As Van turned to face the laser plasma displays once more, he could feel the weight of what was to come pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. The Solace would either fight or fall. Every decision they made from here on out would dictate their future. The final confrontation was approaching. The alien fleet was almost upon them, and their true strength, hidden in the bowels of the Solace, was about to be tested in a way none of them had prepared for. Van straightened his back, feeling the weight of leadership settle upon him. This was it. There was no more hesitation, no more second-guessing. The Solace would either survive, or it would burn with all of them inside. "Get ready," Van muttered, his voice almost lost in the rising noise of the crew's movements. "This is our last chance." And as the Solace drifted forward, the unknown weapon deep within its core waiting to be unlocked, Van knew one thing. The fight was far from over. The Solace groaned under the strain, its hull battered, its systems barely holding together as it drifted through the dense heart of the nebula. Van stood at the command center, his gaze locked on the laser plasma display. The alien fleet, once retreating, was now bearing down on them. Their weapons powered up again, but this time, Van was ready. The crew had done all they could to repair the ship's vital systems. They were running on fumes, but the heart of humanity beat strong within them, ready to fight. "Captain!" Villar's voice came, breaking through the static of the bridge. His fingers flew over the controls as he updated the enemy's position. "They're closing in, but we've got a surprise for them." Van nodded, his voice steady. "We've been holding on to that surprise for a while now. It's time to see what this ship can really do." His words were less of a rallying cry and more of a fact. The crew had spent hours, maybe days, working with the ancient weapon systems hidden in the bowels of the Solace, the very thing the aliens had been chasing. The energy that had awakened deep inside the ship was no longer just an unknown. They had learned to harness it, and they would use it to protect their home. But the cost was unknown. The weapon, buried deep within the ship's core, was volatile. Every blast of energy, every surge of power, felt like they were one step away from tearing the Solace apart. But there was no turning back. "Captain!" Valar's voice was tight, his hands shaking slightly. "We've got one shot at this. If we use the weapon now, it'll either cripple them or leave us with nothing. Are you ready for that?" Van didn't hesitate. His eyes never left the screen. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Valar gave a sharp nod, then turned back to the console. The ship shuddered again, and Van could hear the whine of strained metal beneath the bridge's floor, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. "I'm initiating the sequence now," Valar said, his voice resolute. "We won't get another chance." The room fell into silence as the countdown began on the heads-up display. Every second felt like an eternity. Van's mind raced, but he pushed the doubts aside. The aliens wanted to steal humanity's future, but the Solace had something else in mind. Behind him, Varric Kaleson, the medical officer, emerged from the shadows of the bridge, his face pale from exhaustion. The virus still lingered, but the crew had kept it contained. He stood by the door for a moment, his eyes meeting Van's, but no words passed between them. They both understood. The battle for humanity's survival had moved far beyond medical supplies and containment. This was something deeper, something primal. Van's gaze drifted back to the laser plasma display. The alien ships were coming closer. They were faster than he'd anticipated, but the moment was upon them. They were about to make their final move. The ship shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from the strain of the nebula or the weapon powering up. This was different. This was the feeling of a ship and its crew stepping into their destiny. The Solace was more than a hospital ship. It was Earth's last bastion. "Activate the weapon," Van ordered, his voice a steel edge that cut through the tension. There was no more hesitation. The display flickered one last time, and the energy coursing through the Solace surged like a living thing, twisting and contorting in ways that defied the laws of physics. Valar's fingers moved quickly, directing the flow of power to the ship's weapons. A deep rumble echoed throughout the ship as the weapon took form, building in intensity. Van could feel the pulse of it, not just through the ship, but in his very bones. The ship itself seemed alive, as if the weapon's power was breathing for them, filling them with the raw strength of humanity's untapped potential. "This is it," Valar said under his breath. "Fire." The release of energy felt like a shockwave that rattled the very air, a surge of raw power that tore through the nebula. The Solace's weapons, powered by the ancient force buried within its core, flared brightly, releasing an explosion of energy so fierce it seemed to shatter the very fabric of space. The alien ships in its path disintegrated, torn apart by the unrelenting force. The force was so intense it felt like the entire nebula was shaking, as if it was mourning the destruction they had just unleashed. For a moment, the room fell into a stunned silence. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. The alien fleet was no longer a threat. Their ships had been reduced to dust in the blink of an eye. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something had been lost in the process. Van's chest tightened as he looked around the bridge. The crew had survived, but they had also crossed a line, one they might never be able to come back from. "Captain," Villar said, his voice barely audible over the crackling systems. "The nebula, it's destabilizing the energy released. It's tearing apart the fabric of the system, the ships holding together. But for how long?" Van didn't need to hear the rest. They had done what they had to do, but the cost was steep. The Solace was a living entity now, carrying with it the weight of humanity's future. But the future was uncertain. The weapon had worked, but what came next? What would humanity do now, knowing that their greatest strength had been unleashed? What would they become? He glanced toward the medical bay where Varric stood silently watching him. There was no victory in his eyes, no relief, just a quiet understanding of what they had unleashed. "Get us out of here," Van ordered, his voice soft, but with a deep, unshakable conviction. "We need to get back to Earth." As the Solace limped away from the remnants of the alien fleet, the galaxy around them seemed eerily quiet. Van turned his gaze to the stars beyond the nebula, knowing the battle wasn't over. There was still much to be done. But in that moment he knew one thing for certain. Humanity had proven its worth. They had faced the unknown, stood against the unimaginable, and emerged victorious. The future was uncertain, but humanity, with all its flaws and strengths, would fight. They would adapt, and they would survive. The Solace moved forward, its journey far from finished. But now humanity knew what they were capable of, and the galaxy would never forget.